Good morning. Good morning and welcome to First Unitarian Universalist Church of Nashville. My name is Jay Tiefenbrunn and I'm very pleased to be your Director of Music Ministries. I have just celebrated my 1-year anniversary with the church, so thank you so much. I'm very pleased to be here. Awesome. I'd like to invite you to join in singing this morning our hymn number 346, Come Sing a Song With Me. If you're familiar with it, you can leave the hymnal in the pew because I'll line out the verses for you. Please rise in body or in spirit as you're so moved and join in the singing. Come Sing a Song With Me, number 346. Come sing a song with me. Come sing a song with me. Come sing a song with me. Come sing a song with me, that I might know your mind. And I'll bring you home when home is hard to find. And I'll bring a song of love and a rose in the winter time. Come dream a dream. Come dream a dream with me. Come dream a dream with me. Come dream a dream with me, that I might know your mind. And I'll bring you home when home is hard to find. And I'll bring a song of love and a rose in the wind. Come walk in rain with me. Come walk in rain with me. Come walk in rain with me. Come walk in rain with me, that I might know your mind. And I'll bring you home. And I'll bring you home when home is hard to find. And I'll bring a song of love and the rose in the winter. Come share a rose. Come share a rose with me. Come share a rose with me. Come share a rose with me, that I might know your mind. And I'll bring you home when home is hard to find. And I'll sing a song of love and a rose in the winter time. Our second song this morning is number 23, Bring Many Names. Hymn number 23. We're going to sing all 6 verses. Bring many names, beautiful and good, celebrated parable and story, holiest in glory, living, loving God, hail and Hosanna. third song this morning is in the turquoise hymnal singing The Journey. It is number 1013, Open My Heart. We have quite the crowd today, so section 1, section 2, group 3, and group 4. You can also just repeat one line over and over again if it pleases you, if it makes it easier for you to participate. Everybody sings. The music is not the same without your voice in it. So sing, sing, sing. Open My Heart. We'll sing all together once, and then we'll sing in a round. Good morning. Please take a moment and greet your neighbors.
Of this chalice calls us to community, let there be light. As the flame of this chalice reminds us of our values, let there be light. As the glow of this chalice encourages us to hope, let there be light.
And I'd like to take this moment to introduce to you Reverend Denise Gouch, who is now our Assistant Minister for Congregational Engagement. I know many of you know her because she's been a member here longer than I've been the minister, and she's worked here as our membership coordinator, and now she's going to be working for us half-time in the ministry. I want to thank all of you for helping make that possible. And now I'd like to invite you all to join your hearts and minds in the spirit of worship with this poem by the Unitarian E. Cummings. Love is a place, and through this place of love move with brightness of peace, all places. Yes is a world, and in this world of yes lives skillfully curled all worlds. Once upon a time, a very, very long time ago, a holy child was born. But he was born into a family that was having a very, very horrible fight with a demon. And the demon had threatened to kill all the little boys born into that family. And the father hadn't been able to stop this very powerful demon. So this time, the father had a plan. As soon as a new baby was born, and he said, oh dear, it's a boy. Usually he would have been very happy to see a boy or a girl, but oh dear, it's a boy. He wrapped the baby up and snuck out of the house and went far, far through the night to a very small village way out in the country where everybody were farmers. They all raised cows. And he knew that there was a young couple that were having their first baby that night. And they had given birth to a girl. And he snuck in and he switched the babies. So he took the girl back, who would be safe in his home. And the next morning, the parents, who are Nanda and Yashoda, woke up and saw a baby that didn't really look like they thought the baby looked like when it was born the night before. But it was a beautiful child. His skin was so dark, it shone blue. It looked like the blue just after the sun is set and the sky is getting really dark, that dark blue. And his hair was so black. He had thick hair, and it was black as the night, and his eyes shone like stars. And when they looked at him in wonder, he gave a big smile back. You know how people always say, oh, the baby didn't smile, but we know the baby did smile. So the baby gave a big smile back, and they named this baby Krishna. Now, Krishna quickly grew to be kind of the leader of all the little kids in the village. And he was very mischievous. But because he was always laughing, even though he did naughty things, everybody loved him. For instance, when he let the cows out of the pasture and they all ran away, and all the grown-ups are like, who did that to the kids? And all the kids said, oh, it was Krishna. He made us do it. It was Krishna. And Krishna would just giggle. Yeah, it was me. And the grown-ups would just laugh, and everybody loved him, no matter what he did. If somebody stole the food in somebody's house and fed it to the monkeys, and of course the kids would help Krishna do this, and the grown-ups said, who took that food and fed it to those monkeys? And everybody would say, it was Krishna, he made us do it. And Krishna would go, you laugh. Yeah, it was me. I didn't. All the grown-ups would laugh. They all loved him, the children and the grown-ups. Well, one day, Krishna liked to eat, and the thing that he liked to eat the most was butter. He was always sneaking in to the village homes after one of the women had churned a lot of butter and eating it. But one day, he was just hungry, and there was no butter around, and he started eating the dirt. Well, his mother, Yashoda, was kind of grossed out, and she said, come here, we have to clean your mouth out. That's just not right. Open your mouth. And he opened his mouth, and when she looked inside to clean it out, she didn't see what she expected. I mean, what did she expect to see? Teeth, right? And tongue and tonsils. But when she looked in, she saw the night sky. She saw it looked giant. It looked like it went on forever, and she saw the moon, and she saw planets and stars, the whole Milky Way. Was she surprised? She was so surprised. She was in awe. She was so surprised she couldn't even take it in. As soon as he shut his mouth, she forgot. But she loved him even more after that. She loved him as though, when we say this much, she loved him as much as the whole universe is wide. And that ends my story. And so now we're going to sing. Some of the children, if you want to go to activities, and Jonah is right here by this door behind you, and he'll take you there. And we'll sing the song that's on the inside back cover of your gray hymnal.
Good morning. My name is David Brandon. I'm a member of this congregation, and it is my pleasure to welcome you here to the sanctuary and those joining us online to worship this morning. In order to reach a wider community than those able to be physically present on Sunday morning, portions of the service are live streamed and available on YouTube and on our website at thefun.org. Before I continue, let me remind you to please silence your cell phones. As Unitarian Universalists, our spiritual paths vary, but in this congregation we have made a covenant together. We affirm our interdependence, celebrate our differences, and work for justice. We deepen our relationships as we create a compassionate, welcoming community, nurture spiritual growth, and act on our values in the broader world. I want to extend a special welcome to visitors worshiping with us this morning. We ask you to wear the paper name tags because it helps us to get to know you better. If you are seeking a spiritual home, we hope that you may find it here. Whether you are new to Unitarian Universalism or visiting from another UU congregation, we invite you to stop by the welcome table after the service to have questions answered. People become members of this congregation by signing the membership book and supporting the church with their time and finances. If you are considering joining the church, please talk to our assistant minister, Denise. Following the service, we hope everyone would enjoy coffee and fellowship in the social area, where you will also find information about current opportunities, engagement, and reflection. There are a number of announcements in the weekly bulletin, which I hope you will take home and read. Thank you.
I invite you now to finish arriving in this space, to know yourself in a gathered community. We each come into this space, this time, bringing with us the lives that we live in the weeks in between Sundays. So I invite you to think back over the last week or two or three. And if there are things that have brought you great joy or profound sadness, we invite you to bring them here symbolically. Our lay minister, Kathy Chang, if you feel like you wish to come forward and mark those events, will help you put a stone in the bowl of water. If you would like your joy or sorrow to be expressed, to be verbalized, if you write it on the little yellow slip of paper you'll find in the pew in front of you and hand it to you, when you come forward, we will do our best to express it to the congregation. holding these joys, these sorrows, these concerns in our hearts, along with all of those that have not been spoken, let us join together in a spirit of prayer. Spirit of life and love, we pause this hour to remember those whom we have lost, those whom we fear losing, those from whom we are separated, those to whom we would extend a helping hand, a caring heart, the will to live. We pause this hour also to hope for life and good living, for love and kind words, for reconciliation, for the support of family and friends, for meaning in our struggle, for wholeness. Great Spirit of life, may our memories and hope renew us for the days and nights to come. Amen. May it be so. We've come to the time in the service where our offering will be received. You may know that this congregation shares half of its, or not half, a large portion of the loose cash in the offertory every week with an organization that seeks to further the values in our mission and vision in the community. Our recipient for the month of August is actually a part of this congregation, a project called the Palmer Lecture Series, which was named in honor of our first called minister and his legacy of human rights work. You can see a little bit more about that in the order of service if you're interested. And in a minute, Lois Wagner is going to come forward and tell us more about the Palmer Lecture Series. Before she does, I want to remind you that your offering, like your presence here, is received with gratitude, and we have new ways to give. If you're giving electronically from a mobile device, there are now 3 different ways to do that. Real briefly, you can use our website. There is a phone app called Give Plus, and there's a way to give by text. And you can find the instructions for all of those in the weekly bulletin, which this week I believe is blue. It's on page 3 at the bottom corner. So again, our gratitude for your ongoing gifts. And now, Lois, we'd love to hear more about the Palmer Lecture Series. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name's Lois Wagner, and I'm a member of this congregation. I've always wanted to say that in front of people. I'm a member of this congregation and also a member of the Robert C. Palmer Lecture Committee, and I truly enjoy my involvement with that, and I want to talk a little bit about that. I'm asked to say a few words about the lecture series and why I became involved. The Palmer Lecture was established in 1983 in honor of the Reverend Palmer, who served as this church's first called minister from 1954 to 1971. The Reverend Palmer was a social activist on many fronts, but notably in the civil rights movements, which took place in the 1950s and 60s in this country. The lectures are given by a notable speaker who's renowned in some aspect of civil rights and human rights, and the proceeds collected today will go to offset the cost of speaker fees and the reception and promotion expenses for the lecture, and we have had some tremendously wonderful speakers. I can't tell you how great the speakers have been. But why am I involved? Well, in the 1960s, I was a teenager who lived in a middle-class white suburb in Ohio. And because our community didn't have a school system, we were annexed into a school district that happened to be located in the very wealthiest part of town, and we were bused there for school. Also annexed into our school district were the black kids who lived in a poor working class community down the hill from this wealthy white suburb, and they also provided domestic help for the wealthy people up the hill. Our school, however, was about 95% white. As a high school kid, I was pretty insulated from the world, but somehow I gleaned some awareness of a civil rights movement happening in the South, and that people were going there to protest, and that some were being killed. I have images in my head from newscasts showing violent confrontations where people were being hosed down and killed by the police. My memories were vague, but I do very graphically recall having a strong visceral sense that what I was hearing was abhorrent to me. that it just seemed so wrong. And I was so upset that people would kill other people because of the color of their skin. That's when I first honed my beliefs about civil rights, and as time went on, about human rights and the injustices that infringe upon them to this day. As much as I would have hoped to have put aside, or would have hoped to have seen that these injustices were put aside by now, and as much as I saw movement in that direction prior to 2016, the forces keeping injustice alive are rampant to the day, surfacing and resurfacing beyond the racial injustices we fought so hard against in the 60s. Fighting these injustices is central to our church's social justice efforts and outreach. Our annual lecture, the Palmer Lecture, stands resolute and is keeping the movement alive in some small way. I truly resonate with that. It is one small contribution that I can make in service to this church and the larger community. And that's why I do this. And that's why I get so much more out of it than I could ever give. And so I want to thank you in advance for giving generally to this really important effort that we as a church community do here and for the larger community to keep this focus alive. Thank you so much.
Our reading this morning is taken from the essay Walking Together by 20th century Unitarian historian Conrad Wright. An acceptance of diversity, an awareness of differences is a constant challenge to us to widen our vision, to re-examine our unexamined prejudgments, perhaps even to learn from others. We need such challenges if our faith is to be alive and creative. But an atmosphere of trust is needed if the challenge of diversity is to lead to intellectual and spiritual growth, instead of to a hardening of old prejudices. A common acceptance of basic unitive values makes that possible. The consensus we share is created, sustained, and developed by persons who have chosen to walk together. We long ago rejected creedal tests for membership as a way to exclude those whose views are not quite in line with the doctrinal position prevailing among those already members. We have no mechanism by which an applicant for membership is examined or tested by some ecclesiastical authority to make sure that their opinions are acceptable. The boundary lines of our churches are drawn by individual choice, not by official judgment. There are risks involved, to be sure. King's Chapel ends up being somewhat different from a fellowship in California. Some people who join us find that they are in the wrong pew and move somewhere else. But there are others who find at last a place where they belong. They are the ones whose individual perspectives may be added to enrich the consensus that helps to make a community out of a collection of unrelated individuals. Can two walk together unless they be agreed? Yes and no.
Love is the remedy. Love, it is the cure. Love is what's happening. Of this much I'm sure. It's not some pill that you take. It's a blessing that you give. And when you open up your heart, that is when you start to live. Because the space between what looks like you and me, you know it's what we're all made of. You know the space between is full and filled with love. Love is the seasoning. Love is the spice. Love goes with everything, everything. That's what makes it all so nice. It's not a hole you need to fill. It's a well that's always full. And it has its own gravity, which is why you feel the pull into the space between what looks like you and me. You know it's what we're all made of. You know the space between is full and filled with love. How it's the first thing that you feel when your newborn baby cries, and it's the only thing that will heal you when you finally close your eyes and join the space between what looks like you and me. You know it's what we're all made of. You know the space between is full and filled with love. How it's the first thing that you feel when your newborn baby cries, and it's the only thing that will heal you when you finally close your eyes and join the space between what looks like you and me. You know it's what we're all made of. You know the space between is full and filled with love.
So back in the old days, in the 20th century, I started my ministry 30 years ago as a ministerial intern, 30 years ago right now, in Southern California. And the churches there were very different than the churches in New England where I was from. In those days, churches would have a strong theological identity. People didn't just say, oh, I'm Unitarian Universalism. What they'd say is, you know, I'm Universalist, or I'm Unitarian Christian, or this is a Humanist church. And when I went to Southern California, most of the people there self-identified as Junitarians. They had taken many of them had Jewish backgrounds and had brought that to the church, and we even did many of the Jewish holidays with a Jewish Reconstructionist synagogue together. And at that time, individuals also would identify as like one thing. I always felt a little weird because I said, well, I'm a Unitarian Universalist. Like, what's that? So since then, first I want to say, at that time, they had just approved what we often call our purposes and principles. It was like all the churches together had gotten together and talked about what common values we had. And a part of that was what we call the living tradition we share draws from many sources. And I'm showing it in the turquoise hymnal because it's been updated since those days when I was just beginning my career. But it shows that we understood that even though we kind of had this identity theology, that we understood that as a community we drew from different religions, from different philosophies, and different understandings of religion and history. But over the years, as we move into the 21st century, we became more aware of what in politics they would call intersectionality. That, quite honestly, any identity that we claim is only part of who we are, a theological identity or a role that we play or our job. All those are just strands in our identity, and that they all overlap and intersect and form something much more complex than any one word that says one thing about us could be. So I'm going to, some of you know I was an art teacher in one of my many lives, and I would like to invite you to play art student with me by loosely doing this. Just loosely put your hands together. Now, you might want to spend some time thinking about each finger as one of your identities. Like, for instance, me, I'm a mother, I'm a grandmother, I'm a minister, I like to think I'm a community organizer or social activist sometimes. I'm a Unitarian Universalist theologically. I guess I would say I was, now I would say I was a process theologian. So think about all of those different, so you're looking at your fingers first and thinking about all those different identities kind of weaving together. Then you look at where they intersect, right? There's a little place where they all intersect, and that's starting to show a little bit about the complexity of who you are. Okay? Now this is the art student part. I want you to shift your vision from your fingers to the spaces in between. Okay? So there's spaces between your palms and your fingers. That is your real experience of who you are. It cannot be defined by those limits, those words, those individual roles, those individual beliefs you have. There's an experience there that we're calling space today because I'm a sculptor and I always think about it as space. Jay was just singing about the space in between is love. We looked in the mouth of Krishna. There was this huge, giant space, bigger than you could tell by looking at him on the outside. Every single one of us has that huge, giant space inside of us, right? So one thing that has helped me be able to talk about this in the 21st century is so many of you, especially young people here, have taught me a new definition of the word queer. And I have come to understand this space inside of us as a queer space. So when I talk about theology, it's queer theology. So when young people first started talking about that they were queer, some of us, are like, well, that's a bad word. You can't call people that. But they were self-identifying because they understood that when you looked at them, you had stereotypes about gender, about sexuality, and people have extended it to even broader than that. And that they are not any of those things. They are not defined by identity of those words. Okay? So people have been working on queer theology, queer politics, as a way of talking about that our experience is much more complex and not as stereotypical as it looks like. So I don't know why at first that was surprising to me, because through my whole career, I have known, without knowing how to talk about it, that this was true. For instance, the first church that I served, it was in Minnesota after my internship, called me. And at that time, I would have called myself, I was self-identified as a pagan. And to make it for people who didn't like the word pagan in those days, because 30 years ago, people didn't always like that word, we called ourselves naturalistic theists. Right? Gods and goddesses, and they were nature, right? So naturalistic theists. And I was called by what I would call a fundamentalist humanist congregation, where they were part of the whole movement of religious humanism in the Midwest, in our denomination, in the 20s and 30s and 40s. And I'm like, how does this work? Why did we find each other and it feel right? And I soon learned that it was in the spaces in between all of us, walking together side by side, that we learned that something new was happening, that love was teaching us that we were not simply these identifiers that we claimed. And it was new because it allowed people in those spaces to be more welcoming. And the biggest person they learned to be welcoming was to their own children, because all their children seemed to be saying, we don't agree with you religiously. We're more spiritual than you are. And all of a sudden, their children started coming to church, and they started building relationships with their own children. And that was because of this space. And I knew that it was that space that was created where skillfully curled was all that could be new, possible, growing from that place of love. And then I wondered, why would that surprise me? Because I studied with Conrad Wright in the 20th century, and he taught us that. He taught us that the free church, of which we are an expression of, not the only one, but one, is based on this idea that the free individual, and by free they didn't mean free from everything. What they meant was you're free to live your own conscience, your own spiritual life, to have your own relationship with God or spirit or however you defined it. The free individual gathers freely with community. Now that was very political in some ways, because it meant you gathered freely, not guided by emperor or king, when there was no separation of church and state, by the priests, by the government. So it was that combination. And that combination, though it often is used politically, and I want to talk about that more next week, of us gathering freely together had a profoundly theological purpose. And believe it or not, it was based on a proof text in the Christian book, in the Gospels of John. And the very first person to write about Unitarianism in the 1400s. Michael Servetus used this proof text, and everybody used it after that. And the proof text, it's a story where Nicodemus is a religious leader, and he comes to Jesus, and he says, how can I really understand what you're preaching? And Jesus says, well, you have to become new in the Spirit. You have to become new. It's like, how do you do that? That's crazy. I mean, I was born once, but I was new then. But how do you become new? And Jesus says, and this is the proof text, the Spirit blows where it will. So the Spirit is wind. That's an old image. The Spirit blows where it will. We don't know where it comes from. We don't know where it's going, but it makes all things new. All of our policy and governance is set up to make those spaces within us and around us with each other, to let the Spirit blow where it will and make us new. So, every few years we do a little experiment, and it's mostly fun, so we can see in this congregation what that space is for us in each of our hearts or our mouths theologically. And what we do is I have a list of a bunch of theologies. I never actually counted them. And it's kind of dated list because you use this church used this 14 years ago when you were in the search for a new minister, which was me. And people use it in a survey. And there's maybe about 15 things here, and 200 people filled it out, and but you had 700 checks on it, which meant people already understood that they were intra-religious or queer theologically, that you already understood that you were believed in more than one thing, okay? And belief, I think, is a weird word. It's intellectual. So if it hits your heart, that you're influenced or your experience is touched by one thing. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to read these, and I have a couple people who are going to count, and because we count just to see in the end, how many times to get an average, like last time we did it, they stood 4.5 times. So it's just fun to see, if we're changing that. And I'm going to read it, and you stand. And you stand until they're done counting, so I'll kind of have you sit down. And please stand for as few or as many times as you want. You might stand 0 times, or there's an other at the end, so you might want to stand that time if you're not sure. But or stand every time. It doesn't really matter. This isn't a test. What I'd like you to do is imagine that you're, instead of looking at the fingers or the people, you're looking at the spaces in between. Just get a feel for what that means in this sculptural building. I always say this building is a sculpture. It's not a building. And it costs as much to repair as a sculpture. And so just think of yourselves as people, in the sculpture. Okay, so we got people counting there, and I'll count over here. So the first one is theism. I find support and challenge in a God with whom I have a personal relationship. Okay. Thank you. Deism. I believe that there is a God, but with whom we cannot have a personal relationship. Non-theism. I don't relate to the notion of God, but I don't deny the possibility that God exists. It's going to take a minute to count you. One of the ones that I don't have on the list is one that in that first church I served, he called himself an atheist. I quite honestly don't care. Okay? All right, please sit down. This might be some overlap, the way they define these. Agnosticism. I believe that the existence of a supreme being cannot be known. Okay. Thank you. Atheism. I deny the existence of a God of any kind. It's hard to be that sure. Yeah, right. Okay, thank you. I would say, we have several people saying it depends upon the day. Okay. Humanism. I believe that human beings are responsible for goodness and meaning, and that we must rely on one another for support. Okay, you can sit down. Earth-centered spirituality. I celebrate the sacred circle of life and strive to live in harmony with the rhythms of nature. Now, please sit down. This next bunch, they don't define, which really isn't fair, but so you can self-define these. Judaism. Okay, thank you. Muslim. Thank you. Hindu. Not anymore. Yeah. Oh, that's not me, though. I'm not. Okay, Buddhist. They agree with me that even the only reason people stay Hindu is because the stories are better than the Buddhist stories, but we're all becoming Buddhist. Okay, please sit down. That's great. Christian. Okay, I'm gonna split this into two things. How many of you? This is just interesting. How many of you identify as Christian and believe in the divinity of Jesus, as separate from the divinity of everyone? Okay, so we have some of that. Now, how many of you people are Christian and follow the ethics of Jesus? Yeah. Okay, thank you. Paganism. And they define paganism as I'm inspired by the interconnection of all life, natural and divine, and find inspiration by participating in the traditions of indigenous people. Is David still counting? Oh, there you are, David. You, in my head, you blended into your column. Okay, thank you. Feminist spirituality. I join in reclaiming the divine feminine. My spirituality honors and celebrates the feminine and affirms the sacredness of the body and of sexuality. Sit down. Mysticism. I find support and value in the fullness and connectedness of all things with or without God. So you can be humanist or believe in God. Or I believe the important religious truths cannot be understood in a rational, scientific way. I told you, you're like mystics with hands and feet. So many of us here. Okay. Things happen that are outside the bounds of natural law, and these events have religious significance. Yeah, stand if you want. Come on. It's all right if there's just a few, because that's who we are. We're I'll put 1/2 over here. I got 1.5 over here. Yeah. Okay, this one is kind of the opposite. Rational scientific. I believe that religious truth should meet the test of scientific study and validation, and religious understanding evolves over time. As science, we learn more. Okay, stay up, because if you're half, go like this or something. But this is the one for those of you who are going like this. Not sure. Stand up. Yeah, the separate one. Not sure. I'm not sure. Okay, please sit down. And the last one, other. Yeah, because I definitely would do other myself too. Great. All right. So thank you, everybody. Next week, we will add this all up and give you a report on what happened. And basically, I want us to just burst into song on life that maketh all things new, because we saw this ever-changing spaciousness in this room. And I want to thank you for all that you are and bring theologically to us. And may we never assume that it is one belief or idea. And, all right, this is my closing words. This is it on this sermon. I just thought, okay, many people tell me Unitarian Universalists don't have to believe anything. I just want to close by saying that's wrong. You believe in a whole lot of things. May it be so.
Rise in body or spirit, burst into song, singing number 12, O life that maketh all things new. O life that maketh all things new, the blooming earth, our thoughts within, our pilgrim feet, went with thy dew, in gladness
please be seated because we have a special thanks to do today. And quite honestly, I didn't want to do it until Susan had played all her music. Because some of you know, and that's why you clap so much, this is Susan's last Sunday with us after playing here almost all Sunday mornings for 19 years. Well, maybe I added wrong. It says you started in the fall of 1999.
You know, what is the fall of 90? It's really 98 going into 99.
Oh, well then it was 20 years. All right, see?
But I'm really not sure.
It's all I know is that she has been playing in churches since she was 13 years old. And I don't know how old she is, but I think she has a right to retire from Sunday mornings. And we have been really grateful for all the years she's played with us. We put these in your order of service. It says, Dear Susan, thank you for. Because after the service, we're going to have cake. And Susan, we do want you to join us by the cake, whether you want a piece or not. And we're going to put a bowl by it. And if you would like to write a card, of thanks, a specific way that she's helped you worship in some way. If this is your first Sunday or you've been many years, please put it in the bowl. And I want to invite up two members of our Board of Trustees who want to thank Susan on behalf, that's Bob Day and Chelsea Henry, who want to thank Chelsea on behalf of the whole congregation. Chelsea and Bob will thank Susan on behalf of the whole congregation.
Yes. Yes, come on. So, from the board, on behalf of the congregation, I'd like to present you with this beautiful crystal bowl. It says, Susan Snyder, in appreciation of your 20 years of service at the First Unitarian Church of Nashville.
And this is a check for a retirement gift from the congregation of $1,000, minus the taxes.
Oh my
gosh, thank you so much.
Speech! Speech!
Thank you so much. It's been my privilege to be here, part of this congregation all these years, and I've always felt so much appreciation from all of you, and I am so grateful for that. And I've been really honored to be a part of the higher mission of this church as well. So it's nice to be in a church where you're participating in the worship service, but you also believe in what's being said and what's being done. And that was so important to me here. So thank you very much.
So I'd like to ask you all to join us in the chalice extinguishing. So if you want to stand up, you can. You don't have to. Whatever you want to do.
The words of the chalice extinguishing.
Free church.
The words of the chalice extinguishing are printed at the bottom of the order of service. We extinguish this flame,
but not the light of truth. The warmth of community are the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. So here we are all asked to hold the spaces in between all of our identities. We are called to be guardians of these vast spaces inside each other's mouths and in between one another, so that the Spirit can blow where it will, where yes and no can create something new, unknown, and unimagined. Those spaces are all we need. All the possibilities of love and justice live skillfully curled within. The service is over. Let our service begin again, renewed, after you eat cake.